course, NVIDIA, thus the big earnings after the bell. Big event today. The stock's up more than 8% since the last report. You kind of see some twists and turns when it comes to this stock. Important to note, here at CNBC, we're not going to include the $5.5 billion charge from China restrictions in reporting the numbers. The EPS estimate from LSEG, that's 94 cents a share. You may see some different numbers elsewhere. We're going for 94 cents a share. That's the number we're going with. Right now, you see NVIDIA shares pulling back about 1/3 of 1%. But again, since the last report, up just about 8%. And NVIDIA reporting its quarterly results after the close today. And despite the mounting trade headwinds, shares, they've managed a more than 8% gain over the past 3 months. Our Christina Partsenevelis has more.
Well, don't expect any fireworks this time around. Macro uncertainty and that pesky ban on H20 chips destined for China have really thrown a wrench into things. The street's big players aren't mincing words here either. Bank of America, Piper, Mizuho, all expecting NVIDIA to come up short on revenues for the April quarter. And they also see gross margins taking a hit. The culprit is lost revenue from China. That's plain and simple. But here's the thing. This doom and gloom scenario isn't supposed to be permanent. These same analysts see brighter days ahead for NVIDIA in the second half of the year. You've got NVIDIA working on China-compliant chips that could squeeze under U.S. export thresholds. Word is it'll likely hit in the market in late July, so it's not a complete farewell to that massive Chinese market. Then there's the Grace Blackwell rack production story. Those manufacturing lines are getting their act together and should really start ramping up later this year, and that's a big deal for meeting demand. And let's not forget about sovereign AI investment cycles that are picking up steam, plus all that continued CapEx spending from the hyperscalers like Microsoft, for example. The UAE and Saudi Arabia just committed billions to buying NVIDIA chips and AMD as well. So we're talking some serious deep pockets here. The options market is pricing in about a 7% move in the stock post-earnings, and it looks like much of that action will really hinge on what NVIDIA says about their July quarter revenue guidance, which, Frank, analysts are hoping will hit at least $46 billion. All
right, for much more on NVIDIA's earnings and the broader markets, let's bring in Ross Mayfield, investment strategist at Baird. Ross, good morning. Good to see you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
All right, so Christina just kind of hit on it just a second ago. The implied options move for NVIDIA after earnings about 7.5%, either to the upside or to the downside. Obviously, either move would have broader market implications. Also, the market, given the NVIDIA basically a pass for that $5.5 billion charge, even though it's $5.5 billion. In your mind, what are your expectations for not only NVIDIA, but also the market reaction?
Yeah, I'm pretty optimistic about it. I mean, obviously, there's two main things the market wants to hear about. One is AI demand. We've seen a rebound in these AI names over the last month plus. And so that narrative is really important for the market going forward. And then on the other hand, they're linked directly to trade with China. We've obviously had these trade headwinds. So I think that any progress on that front will be really important. And obviously, they're working on circumventing some of those rules. The Trump administration seems more willing at least to work with NVIDIA than some other tech companies that have come in their sightlines. So I'm optimistic. I think it's going to be a good quarter, and I think that the guidance for the full year will be even better and enough to get the market behind this AI theme again.
Yeah, a lot of people worried about that guidance for the current quarter especially.
We know that NVIDIA, Katie, and welcome, we know it's an important stock. How important? Is it when you look at it, is it as important as I don't know, the 200-day average on the S&P? It could almost be that important.
I think it's doubly important because you have the footprint, right? Just the market cap is so sizable, and its influence on sentiment, right? So that's the big deal. Because I think the AI trade is something that's been driving the market. And if you feel like there's some crack in that, that's a problem. And that's going to impact market sentiment at a time where I would argue it's pretty fragile because the sentiment metrics are very bullish right now. They're not extreme, but we're close to those levels. So any hit to that sentiment should be pretty damaging, I'd say, to the major indices.
And it's, it encompasses AI, and it also factors into the performance of the Mag 7 over the past year as well, because a lot of that was AI related, and in NVIDIA, every time you want to do AI, you're talking about NVIDIA.
Yeah, without question, it's been an outperformer within the Mag 7. It's now up about 57% from the April low, which is remarkable. And you compare that to Apple. Apple's underperformed by comparison by a big measure. CRM, or Salesforce, which is reporting today as well, is about 20% above its April low. So it's coming into earnings pretty hot, is what I would say, and that creates a proof point for it, just from a sentiment perspective.
You don't even want to, I'm not going to ask you about what you're looking for fundamentals. That has nothing to do with what you do, basically.
But the reaction is going to be very interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost a lose-lose situation from a technical perspective, because if we see a gap up, the gap is probably going to look exhaustive, and on Friday, the stock would be prone to one of those counter-trend signals from the DeMark indicators. Whereas if we see some kind of down move, if you zoom out on the chart, it's going to take the shape of a head and shoulders top. We all know what that is. And it's simply a manifestation of a lower high following sort of a neckline of support. That neckline is roughly, I'd say, about 100 on the chart. But there is support around 115. These are nice round numbers, thankfully easy to remember. And on the upside, the resistance is around 150. So with the stock close to 135, you realize that it's pretty much sandwiched between support and resistance, which doesn't help us a whole lot.
Big numbers expected, but I don't know, how big do they have to be? Are there whisper numbers? Like, it's a 66% revenue gain year over year as expected, 50% plus gain in the bottom line. Well, if it does that, is that enough to move the stock higher, or are there even more bullish expectations?
Actually, this is one of those quarters that there's a bit of a nuance, because there was a China write-off for $5.5 billion. So revenue sequentially, right? So the guidance is really all that matters. They usually beat by 2 or 3 billion. You know, I wouldn't be shocked to see a couple billion-ish, maybe a little less this time. Actually, gaming was really good, and data center. But the guidance is all that matters, really, and there's a loss of 4 to 5 billion in revenue from China for the July quarter, which is going to complicate guidance. But I think they're going to sound really good, Joe, because they're on the right side of Trump right now, and that's the big change from 90 days ago, is that they have an ally in the White House who's cutting deals, and sovereign AI is going through the roof.
So what we highlighted by talking about what the president said about Tim Cook, you think that the counter to that was he was comparing Tim Cook to Jensen Huang, who was there with him. So just being there with him puts NVIDIA on the right side of the White House?
Well, in terms of the Middle East,
kind of, yes.
In terms of the Middle East, though, they have aspirations to create these AI factories and take their excess energy and turn it into
just
tokens.
In terms of kissing the ring, and
kissing the ring.
Yeah,
but
that helps.
It helps, but I don't know what Tim Cook would have done there. I mean, Tim Cook going to Saudi Arabia, it's a small market for iPhones. They're not going to make iPhones there, but they're actually going to make AI in the Middle East.
Don't you think he wishes he went at this point?
Maybe he does. I wouldn't count Tim Cook out. Now, Tim, but Jensen right now is the most favored son of the U.S., and it's great to see. He's a great guy, and he's invented, and curated this whole AI boom. Now, Tim Cook, on the other hand, he's got a tougher hand because he built this whole thing in China. iPhone's a consumer device. It has nothing to do with the Middle East, really. And I wouldn't count him out. He's a good diplomat. He's operational excellence. The death of Apple's greatly exaggerated.
Okay. 3.3 billion. I mean, they're both, I don't know how you grow a $3.3 billion market cap company. Trillion, sorry, Jesus. Yeah, trillion, 3.3 trillion for NVIDIA. What is it? Is it going to be a $5 trillion company?
There's a really, really good chance, Joe. This company has a TAM, they say, of $1 trillion potentially. I think it's bigger than that. And the reason is that they are created a lot of the architecture and stack for the next generation of the data center, from the hyperscaler down to the enterprise. Enterprise hasn't really even gotten going yet. So their share of data center CapEx is going to go up, and it's going to be huge. Now, if there's $1 trillion a year, let's say, in a couple of years, what's NVIDIA's share? It could be up to half. It could be, and I think it's bigger than $1 trillion, because there's a whole new paradigm in terms of how we compute and how we use AI. And software is becoming AI factories. So the factories create tokens, they create software. It's a huge market. It's probably impossible to calculate.
So what do we listen for?
What we listened for is a change of 90 days ago, even at their GTC, I don't think they had any idea what was going on with Trump. Now they know he was with him in the Middle East. And I think we want to hear about sequential growth after this quarter when they take the China hit. If they're optimistic about sequential growth, the street's looking for double digits. And then we want to hear if calendar 26 is a growth year. And there's so much more information now than there was available even 2 months ago. That's really the key. And I think that the street's expectations for next year are very conservative, 25% or so growth in the data center business. They might be able to crush that.
Ben, if you're so convinced that he is most favored son right now and in so tight with the Trump administration, is there any chance that the H20 rulings would get reversed, that they'd be able to sell into the China market, or is that just off the table, gone forever?
You know, I was in Taiwan very recently, and there was a buzz there. Oh, there's going to be a chip. There's going to be a chip, but it can't be based on what the H20 was. Right. And NVIDIA, you know, already wrote it off, and now you saw the Reuters article, and there's talks that there will be a chip. I think that there is a turn in momentum. I'm not sure which quarter they get a chip ready for China, but if there's a China deal with the Trump administration, I would not be shocked if NVIDIA is part of it. And it's like, hey, you can have a lower end chip, because I think they've gotten through to Trump and his team that the world needs to be on a U.S. stack for AI rather than a Chinese stack. And I think that's resonating with the president after spending so much time with Jensen.
Really?
I do.
You can have it, but you just can't have what we have. I think.
Well, at least you have something, and we know what's going on. And they're 50%, according to Jensen, 50% of the AI researchers are Chinese or in China.
The question is, does that slow them down from trying to produce their own?
Well,
I mean, right? The mother of invention is a very powerful force. And I would argue that actually a lot of what Huawei has managed to do is a function of the mother of invention, right? They've been sort of forced into a corner. They got to figure it out. If we give them these chips, you could argue maybe it means they don't have to figure it out as quickly. That could actually be helpful to us. Sort of
yeah. I think it's helpful that perhaps but I think it's the whole stack. I think it's using software, using, developing, having more people developing Dakuda, developing on the NVIDIA platform a trusted U.S. entity that everybody's familiar with in this country, I think is a big advantage rather than wild, wild west, seeing what the developers do with Huawei and creating this whole separate ecosystem.
By the way, you for or against open source, given your views about China?
I'm for it. I'm for it. I think that DeepSeek, I think DeepSeek was some good innovations. Anyway, there were some really good innovations there that then everybody can adopt and move the industry forward. And I think that I do like the open source, and I think it will be very useful for enterprise adoption. But I think it'll be a mix. There'll be a few closed and an open as well. I think it fosters innovation, guys.
You got a very busy day today.
Yeah, and this is Fulcrum. I mean, these are the people. Enterprise software is Mark Benioff. Semiconductors, but also some software is Jensen. Politics is Jensen. We're going to cover China, obviously, but remember, there's the rest of the world that apparently the president's really helping him get orders. We got to figure out whether, David, this is all data center, which is way people want to contain the thinking, and China shut down, or whether there's something bigger going on here. Whether the next generation chips are really going to make it so that the robots are real. What does video mean if you can ingest? I thought it was very interesting. Joanna Stern from the Journal talking about everyone can make a movie. How much of that is...
Well, I was talking about it yesterday with you guys, and you remember VO3? I mentioned it about 10 times because it freaked me out when I was watching all that stuff over the weekend.
So my thesis is duplicative of what you said.
I'm just saying. That's all. All right, back to the uses of chips. Don't get sidetracked by my wisecracking. Back to the uses of chips.
I won't. I just think that we have
robots
to think
is a
bigger than
long
the
way away,
no,
Jim.
And that's the problem with your
it's
small-minded
not.
thinking.
It's not. When Elon Musk sits there and says 1 million by 2030, we know that he is typically more aggressive. All right, that's still quite a ways away. and that is an aggressive forecast. It is quite some time till they're going to be rolling off.
Well, but there's
rolling off the assembly line, so to speak, and doing all sorts of autonomous tasks.
But you have Omniverse, which is the biggest market that Jensen sees, is the actual building of plant equipment, ships, giant things. Omniverse, that's his. And then Groot. And Groot, Groot. Like,
Groot, like the superhero.
Yeah, Groot is is a software-based program that allows you to do, self-driving, full self-driving, and then ultimately Optimus.
Right.
And that's a roadmap. See what I'm saying, Carl, if we look at this thing as what the quarter's going to do, and whether there's going to be a philosophical debate that can still change in China, we are missing what this man is accomplishing. This man is trying to get us to the next level of an industrial revolution. And he is not going to stop right here because China didn't get its chips.
Right. So your point is simply that you got to look out at further out years. Revenue growth that you believe is going to be perhaps stronger than others, or at least you're confident will be. And then I guess you can apply a discounted cash flow model on whatever you want to do, but you're going to get to a higher stock price now.
Exactly. And that's the way that if people go into it, and if most people go into it, then the stock goes higher because I think he's got a great roadmap. If people go into it and just say, you know what, he lost China, and because he lost China, he lost the world, because China was a big customer, I think that if that's the prevailing wisdom post, then the stock goes down. This is a crowdsourced stock now.
Yeah, we've obviously set it up many times this week with analysts who are prepared for potentially some volatility in the price after tonight's print. You did talk to Jensen Huang, I think back in March, about the level of compute that will be needed long term. Take a listen to this.
You were talking about we need an amount of computation that's easily 100 times more than we thought. So far, so good.
Yeah.
Last year. Were we that off last year?
Yeah, we're way off, yeah.
We were. We didn't see it.
Yeah.
We just didn't know how important it is.
Well, we realized that reasoning is very important to intelligence. And we realized that one-shot AI that we were using wasn't representative of intelligence, and that we were going to make incredible progress. And last year, with reasoning models coming out, ChatGPT's reasoning model and others, and it just took off. People love these reasoning models. That we love that it's giving us multiple answers that we can choose from. We love the fact that the AI is reflective of its own answers. And did I answer that question right? And could I have better options that I can present you? And so there's a lot of different ways that the AI has now become much more reasonable.
Okay.
And reasoning. And so that requires a lot more computation, hundreds more time computation. And so this new level of AI is going to demand a lot of chips, which is the reason why
but you're talking
demand
about
for
millions
Blackwell.
of chips. I mean, you're talking about data centers. A huge data center, Larry Ellison data center. How many chips does that need?
Hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
It's incredible. It's incredible. And there's going to be multiple Ellison data centers.
Musk sent 1 million GPUs a week ago to me.
Exactly.
1 million GPUs for their new, not the existing, what he's building another thing near Memphis to power Grok, your favorite.
Right. Well, let's talk about Grok for a second. So when you put in, what did Todd McKinnon say last night that upset people so badly on the Okta call? It thinks for maybe 2 minutes. I don't have 2 minutes. And then it spits out, maybe it was this, maybe it was that, maybe it's this. I think if they had more power, I think it would say it's this. Right now, I know to use the term wishy-washy is very, it's very humanoid, so to speak. What we really want is, we want definitive. And I think that there is almost nothing definitive in these sites right now. And this is because they don't have enough compute.
Looking ahead to NVIDIA's earnings, there are two key items to pay attention to: next quarter revenue guidance, and then gross margins and margin guidance. We know that the long-term thesis behind NVIDIA is extremely strong. But when it comes to how market participants will react in the short term, I think next quarter revenue guidance and margins will be more important than usual on this earnings report. Let me quickly explain why. First, let's cover next quarter revenue guidance. With NVIDIA restricted from selling the H20 in China, the question is what will fill that short-term revenue gap. Prior to the H20 restriction, China represented 13% of NVIDIA's revenue. The Middle East AI deal deals that were recently announced should help offset what NVIDIA is missing out on from China. But those deals pertain to NVIDIA's Blackwell Ultra, and Blackwell Ultra doesn't launch until the fiscal third quarter, so probably in August. And so the question is, what will fill the short-term revenue gap in fiscal Q2 while NVIDIA is both restricted from selling to China, and we're also waiting for Blackwell Ultra to begin shipping in Q3. It was recently reported that NVIDIA raised prices of its products across the board by as much as 10 to 20% due to higher costs at TSMC's Arizona plant. And so perhaps this price increase could help offset the short-term revenue air pocket that we're talking about. That's possible. A positive note on Blackwell Ultra is that the production ramp should be much faster and much smoother than the production ramp of Blackwell. This is because Blackwell Ultra is simply an upgrade of the chips within the Blackwell system. It's not a complete system upgrade like Blackwell was. This means we are less likely to see delays in the production ramp of Blackwell Ultra like what we saw with Blackwell. Now, going back to this earnings report, in addition to next quarter revenue guidance, I think that gross margins and margin guidance will be more important than usual as well. This is because of what NVIDIA leadership told us on the company's last earnings call. We were told back in February that margins would dip into the low 70s as NVIDIA spent money to expedite the manufacturing of Blackwell, and that margins would then return to the mid-70s late this fiscal year after Blackwell has ramped. Now, Jensen told us last week at Computex that Grace Blackwell is in full production. And based on TSMC's April revenue report, we can infer that Blackwell production has ramped substantially. TSMC is the company that manufactures NVIDIA's chips, and they reported month-over-month revenue growth of 22.2%, which is massive. And so I wonder if Blackwell's production ramp is ahead of schedule, and therefore maybe we could get higher than expected margin guidance. But there's a caveat on this point. NVIDIA did not make any distinction between the production ramps of Blackwell and Blackwell Ultra on the earnings call in February when they spoke about margins returning to the mid-70s. And so now the question is, will we have to wait until after the production ramp of Blackwell Ultra for margins to return to the mid-70s? Or will margins move back to the mid-70s sooner than we thought since Blackwell is now in full production? Hopefully we will get clarification on this specific point during the earnings call. And so all of that to say that margin guidance will be more important than usual on this earnings report. Another topic that I expect to be brought up on this earnings call is NVIDIA's next chip for China. It appears that NVIDIA is working on a new Blackwell chip specifically designed for the Chinese market that would be compliant with U.S. export controls. There have been reports claiming that NVIDIA plans to launch this new chip in China starting in July. And so now the question is whether that is true or not. And if it is true, what impact will it have on NVIDIA's gross margin? NVIDIA's margin on the H20 is estimated to have been in the 50% range, which is much lower than NVIDIA's gross margin in the 70% range. And so if there is a new China chip on the way, what impact will it have on NVIDIA's gross margin? These are all important questions that I'm sure will be brought up at some point on NVIDIA earnings call. All right, so those are some important topics to look out for on this earnings report. Now the question is, what should you do ahead of earnings? I'm not a financial advisor, so I cannot tell you what to do. That being said, here are some thoughts that I think may be helpful to you. Before an earnings report, I think it's important to ask yourself this question: is this position a long-term investment or a short-term trade? Once you have a clear answer to that question, the decision-making process becomes much easier. If the position is a short-term trade, then that is a more complex situation. I personally don't like to hold short-term trades into earnings reports since I don't know what the earnings results will be, but that's just my opinion. On the other hand, if this is a long-term investment that I intend to hold for the next 5+ years, then I would rather hold through earnings, go through the earnings report, listen to the earnings call, take some time to consider the results, and as long as nothing fundamentally negative has changed about the company, then I have no reason to sell. It's that simple. Also, just a word of caution: be very careful about holding options into NVIDIA's earnings. I'm not telling you what to do, but I just want you to be aware that implied volatility crush is usually very substantial right after NVIDIA reports earnings. Let me quickly explain what this is. So before NVIDIA reports earnings, option premiums are usually juiced up and more expensive than usual due to all of the extra volatility ahead of earnings. And then the very next day after NVIDIA reports earnings, volatility usually drops off a cliff, pulling down option premiums with it. This is what is known as implied volatility crush, and it is no joke. So just be careful if you're thinking about trading short-dated options around NVIDIA's earnings. That is not something I would recommend. But again, I'm not a financial advisor, so I cannot tell you what to do. If you need help with your unique circumstance, consider reaching out to a certified financial professional who can help you with your unique situation. All right, so those are some of my thoughts as we head into this earnings report. Regardless of how market participants react to this specific report, I am bullish on the long-term future of NVIDIA, and I expect the long-term thesis to be strengthened both by this earnings report and what we hear on the earnings call. AI demand is extremely strong based on what all of the hyperscalers told us on their earnings calls and what we've been hearing from other companies like OpenAI, xAI, Perplexity, and others. NVIDIA still maintains a strong competitive moat across both hardware and software. I think that NVIDIA's new NVLink Fusion has massive implications for NVIDIA, maintaining its moat and keeping clients within their ecosystem. And NVIDIA is still delivering performance upgrades that are so significant that their customers have no choice but to continue purchasing NVIDIA's latest products in large quantities. I'm completely serious when I say that I think NVIDIA still has runway ahead of it, and I genuinely think that this company's best days are ahead. At least that's my view of the situation. Remember to stay calm in this market. Remember to maintain a long-term perspective, and do not make any hasty or irrational decisions. intelligence. With all of that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.